Good evening, everyone, and welcome to The Agenda, a look back at those bills the Davis administration has tabled, debated, and passed since assuming office a little under 2 years ago. And this, of course, as the clock ticks on the opening of Parliament that makes its return to historic Parliament Square Wednesday morning. And that's exactly where you can find our Alto V's Munnings. Alto, what are final preparations looking like?
Good evening, Makushla, and to your guests. Makushla, Parliament Square has totally been transformed as final preparations are now underway for tomorrow morning's opening of Parliament ceremony. Earlier, Governor General, Her Excellency, the Right Honorable Cynthia Mother Pratt was here. She was sitting in the throne, practicing to read the speech from the throne for tomorrow morning's ceremony. She was accompanied by the Commissioner of Police, Clayton Fernandez, as well as other senior government officials. If you can see behind me, protocol officers are here making their last-minute logistical preparations. I understand from the logistical coordinator, Permanent Secretary Jack Thompson, that Parliament Square has been transformed into, say, a session of the Senate. That's exactly what organizers are hoping to accomplish with tomorrow morning's ceremony. They want to model the ceremony like a session from the Senate. Now, as I mentioned, protocol officers are here. Other private organizations are here assisting in the preparation of tomorrow morning's opening of Parliament ceremony, and I must say I'm even impressed with the preparations that are here. There are monitors in each segment of the ceremony hall. There are monitors that have been erected, so in order for persons who are sitting in the back of the room, they have access to see exactly what's going on through the monitors that have been posted. And if you are a viewer and you're planning on coming here tomorrow to attend the opening of Parliament ceremony, and of course everybody knows it's hot outside, there are portable air conditioners and fans here to keep everyone inside here cool. So Makushla, the final preparations are underway. As I said, mainly protocol officers are here right now, ensuring that every seat, every designated and reserved seat is taken, and the appropriate personnel, leaders, cabinet ministers, parliamentarians, all of them have their designated seat to enjoy tomorrow morning's opening ceremony of Parliament. When we come back in our other block, we will tell you about security for tomorrow morning's ceremony. Reporting live from Parliament Square, I'm Alto V's Munnings. Back to you, Makushla.
Well, thanks, Alto. Evidently, organizers are working up to the hour, up to the minute, really, to ensure that tomorrow's opening of Parliament is pulled off without a hitch. Well, joining me in studio this evening are Senate Vice President Barry Griffin and Free National Movement Chair Dr. Dwayne Sands. Gentlemen, welcome to The Agenda.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having me.
Gentlemen, we're on the eve of a new parliamentary session. Following a prorogation in mid-August, that decision was made. The F&M has criticized the move. The move has taken many by surprise. Mr. Griffin, was this always the plan? Was it always the plan for the Davis administration 2 years in, just shy of 2 years in, to prorogue Parliament?
So I'm not sure why it would have taken people by surprise, because it's clear in our blueprint for change. One of the things that we said in our blueprint for change is that we want to transform and revitalize the system of governance, and that includes the Parliament. So you would have seen that we would have tabled, debated, and passed the Parliamentary Service Bill, and part of that is to reorganize the institution of Parliament. One of the things in our blueprint for change that we said is that we're going to go back to the traditional way of having regular sessions of Parliament. As you would be aware, we follow the Westminster system, and in that system there are regular breaks in Parliament where you prorogue and the government has an opportunity to reassess and start a new legislative agenda. In fact, our initial plan was to have it each year, but that didn't happen last year, and so now we believe that the 2-year mark is the appropriate mark to set the new legislative agenda.
So, Mr. Griffin, Senator Griffin, you're telling me that in another 2 years, you're telling us and our viewers that in another 2 years we'll prorogue Parliament again. And for the Davis administration, then, this will be the norm.
So this will be the norm, and we hope that this will become the norm moving forward. Here in the Bahamas, we've sort of had long 5-year sessions of Parliament, but that's not how it's supposed to be. We're supposed to break at regular intervals, whether it's a year or 2 years, so that the session of Parliament ends and the government has an opportunity to reassess and lay down the new policies. So, for example, when we would have come into power, we would have met the government and the country in a particular state. So the legislative agenda at that point would have addressed the concerns of that period, but now we believe we've had a few successes, we've made a few strides, and so now it's time to say the government's priorities are shifting, and that will be reflected in the speech from the throne.
Well, Senator Griffin, we've heard your rationale. We're going to bring Dr. Sands in on the conversation because, like I noted earlier, the FNM has criticized Parliament being prorogued. The FNM sees it as not so much a reset, but a do-over for letting the people down so far in its term in office. Dr. Sands, quantify that statement for us. And is this appropriate time, despite the fact that Senator Griffin has said, well, we've had our accomplishments, we're following the Westminster system, it should have been done after 1 year, but we decided to wait till 2, and we've also decided that this will be the norm going forward. What is the issue with that for the FNM?
So the kind description of the first 2 years was this was a less than auspicious 2 years. The honest assessment, it was a disastrous 2 years. And I think that the Prime Minister recognized that he had to, get a timeout to change the narrative from the disastrous discussion of BPL and the crisis in terms of energy, the immigration fiasco, the fact that this administration has spent so much and created a cost of living crisis. And so I think when you're in trouble, you try to get a reset, call for a timeout, and hope that you can regroup. And this reopening of Parliament tomorrow after the prorogation is about hoping to get a fresh start. And I hope, I pray that it's more about a fresh start for the suffering Bahamian people.
Now, just to play devil's advocate for a moment, you said it's been a disastrous 2 years. What do you say in light of the PLP prides itself on passing more than 100 bills in under 2 years?
There have been several bills that I think they should be commended for. And there are others for which they should absolutely not try to take any kudos. Certainly if you look at the Protection Against Violence Act, which was a bait and switch from the gender protection bill, or the gender-based violence bill. It was a bill that left a very bitter taste in the mouth of those NGOs, those persons that have been working aggressively since 2016 and before. And I think this administration capitulated to try and throw something at the public. The challenge with the legislative agenda measured in just numbers, we have to ask, what has the impact been on the ordinary Bahamian? And what is amazing is that the party of Pindling, the party that claims to want to wipe away every tear from every eye, has been the party that has overseen the single greatest reduction in the quality of life of ordinary Bahamian citizens in recent memory.
Because if you'd allow me, well, first I would just like to address a few things. And so I don't think the government is running from any issues. In fact, the issues that Dr. Sands speak of are the issues you can expect for us to address head on in the speech from the throne. We recognize that because of the situation in Haiti, there's an immigration crisis. With the recent cabinet shuffle, we indicated and shown to the people that that's going to be a priority for the government. The cost of living, of which many factors we cannot control because there are international pressures on cost and transportation and fuel are things that are largely out of our control. But the government has indicated that we are going to address these things. And when the prorogation was done, the Attorney General Ryan Pinder, he said that in the new legislative session, we are going to address the cost of living. We are going to address immigration.
We're going to stick a pin right there, and we're going to take a look at what Chief Clerk in the House of Assembly has to say about preparing for a ceremony of this magnitude. And as we know, ceremonies of such Preparation is key, and with just 2 months to pretty much pull it together, lots of work to be done.
The parliamentarians, that's House of Assembly members and senators, they will assemble in their respective chambers. And then, of course, each house will dispatch a 3-member committee to Her Excellency the Governor General. The committee from the Senate will inform the Governor General that they are awaiting her attendance in the Senate chamber in Parliament Square. The House of Assembly committee will be informing the Governor General that the Speaker and the House members are awaiting her command to attend the Senate chamber in Parliament Square. And they will both return and advise the presiding officer that they have carried out her instructions. The Senate will then adjourn to Parliament Square and await for the arrival of the Governor General. The Governor General will arrive, inspect the honor guard, and ascend the throne. Immediately thereafter, the Governor General will instruct the black rod from the Senate to command the attendance of the members of the House of Assembly to the Senate chamber in Parliament Square. The black rod will then approach the chamber, rap on the door. He would be allowed in, and he will approach the bar, and he will inform the Speaker that the Governor General is awaiting the attendance or command the attendance of the House of Assembly, the Speaker with members of the House of Assembly in the Senate chamber in Parliament Square. Then, of course, the Speaker's procession will be led by the mace. The mace will be first the Speaker, then the clerks, Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, and members of the House of Assembly. In order of precedence, of course. We will all assemble in the Senate chamber in Parliament Square. You will notice that while everybody, including the senators and the judiciary, will be seated, the Prime Minister, the Speaker, and members of the House of Assembly will stand for the duration of their speech from the throne. Once we arrive in the square, the Prime Minister will proceed to the throne and present the Governor General with the speech from the throne. He will resume his position in the lineup next to the Speaker's procession, and the reading of the speech from the throne will commence. After the speech from the throne is finished, the Governor General will then depart. After the Governor General departs, the House of Assembly, the Speaker and members of the House of Assembly will also depart. And then, of course, everybody else will fall out. The House of Assembly will resume its meetings. The senators, the President and the senators will then reassemble in the Senate chamber and, of course, take care of further House meeting matters. And after the House is either adjourned or suspended, everybody will proceed to Government House.
Gentlemen, both of you have attended openings of Parliament. You, Senator Griffin, just in 2021 as a newly appointed senator. For you, Dr. Sands, I think it's been
Twice.
2 occasions, once as a senator, another as a minister of the government. What goes on in that moment, standing there waiting for the speech from the throne? I would imagine that anxiety is high, especially for first-timers. Senator Griffin?
I mean, I think for me, I remember it being sort of a very memorable and momentous occasion. At that point, I was appointed a senator and then elected as the vice president of the Senate, the youngest person to have that role. And so sort of the weight of history and sort of being in that role at such a young age sort of really dawned on me. And so it's a day I certainly would remember.
As a Bahamian, you are afforded the privilege of serving your country in a way that very few people are allowed or have the opportunity. And so the gravity of the moment certainly is there. This year, we also have lost a son of the soil, a patriotic Bahamian, and I think that is going to add yet another issue to, or another emotion to the day. And certainly to have lost Minister Obadiah Hercules Wilshcombe, is going to change the tone somewhat. But overall, I think for all of us, on all sides, it is a momentous occasion, and the privilege to serve the people of this country is not lost on you.
Well, you're watching The Agenda here on the ZNS News Network. Returns after this break.
We got our parliamentary tradition from the English. But our system is a parliamentary democracy. And a parliamentary democracy is simply, to me, what it means is a people being governed by their own elected representatives. That's the basis and the foundation. People are elected, are governed by their own elected representatives. That's parliamentary democracy. We use those things in the nationhood and statehood and all the rest of that. You can be a nation without being a state. When we became a nation, it's difficult to say. But we were Bahamians, and this was the Bahamas long before 1973. You know that. I was a Bahamian, and all of us who were born before 73, we were Bahamians. Our parents, our grandparents before us going way back. Bahamians. This is an old country. Because this was the first, this is where Columbus landed. And this is where the civilization, the new civilization in the West started. We had civilizations before in South America and North America, which the Europeans mostly destroyed. But the new history of the New World started right here in the Bahamas.
Welcome back to The Agenda. Gentlemen, as noted, as Dr. Sands noted before the break, we're walking into an opening of Parliament where the government, the people of the Bahamas, we're still grieving the loss of a senior cabinet minister. Some say a giant in our society, in the person of Social Services, Information and Broadcasting Minister, leader of government business, also West Grand Bahama and Bimini MP Obi Wilshcombe. To add another layer of that, the PLP is joining in mourning the loss of the wife of Cabinet Minister Keith Bell. Was there, Senator Griffin, any second guessing whether this opening of Parliament should be perhaps postponed, given all that occurred in such a short space of time?
So first, I'd like to join you in acknowledging the death of Obi Wilshcombe. I think it's an incredibly sad time for the country, for the PLP, for the people of Grand Bahama, and for all Bahamians. Obi Wilshcombe was a giant of a politician, and as a young sort of upcoming politician, we all looked up to him. But I think Obi would have wanted us to continue on. I think it was a consideration for the cabinet, and the government, in particular the cabinet, has been working very closely with the family in terms of planning the various memorials, in terms of planning the funeral to ensure that his legacy is respected, that his family is respected, and that they're involved and the government is involved hand in hand with all of the preparations. And so all of the decisions that have been made in consultation with his family. And so once they're pleased and happy to move forward, I think the government of the Bahamas was happy to do so in that regard.
Now, obviously, the loss of Obi Wilshcombe leaves a huge void in the Progressive Liberal Party in terms of who will assume that incredible role of leader of government business in the House of Assembly.
Yep.
What insight can you give us on that?
Well, I think, first of all, I have to say, when we first came in, it was no question that someone such as Obi Wilshcombe would have been the leader of government business. For that position, you need someone who is familiar with parliamentary procedure, someone who can command the attention, not just of the opposition, but of their colleagues. We have a whip, but the leader of government business also sort of operates as a whip, ensuring that Parliament is organized and that both the government and the opposition knows the agenda and are ready to move forward. And so I think that will be a void that needs to be filled, and whoever steps into that role has big shoes to fill. I am aware that the Prime Minister was in discussions and consultation with his cabinet to fill the role. From my knowledge, the person has been identified. I don't think I'm at liberty to say who that is, but I'll allow the speculation. But I think we can expect someone who would command the respect of the government side as well as the opposition side, someone who is familiar with parliamentary procedure, someone who is organized and can lead the House.
And I understand that that person must be a senior cabinet minister.
Well, I think the tradition is that they are a senior cabinet minister. The truth is anybody on the government side can be appointed, but because of the nature of the role, it's usually someone who is senior in the cabinet.
Dr. Sands, prorogation dictates that bills fall away. So is the case with the questions the opposition would have left on the agenda. For the Free National Movement, the Free National Movement cites that 84 questions alone on immigration. Committees as well fall away. Is it the FNM's intention that during this new legislative agenda, those questions return? Will the party make a push for that to happen?
We've had a 2-month hiatus in the business, in the people's business. When we get back to work, roll up our sleeve, those same questions will be put back on the table because the Bahamian people await the answers. And so all of the questions that fell off will be put back on the table. In addition, the important work being done by the Public Accounts Committee and other committees will resume. This administration has taken a very interesting approach to ignoring a lot of the required functions for reporting, for spending, for procurement, for borrowing, etc. And the Public Accounts Committee provides a level of oversight. It is amazing the degree to which this administration has attempted to stop the PAC from doing its work. And hopefully, with the reset, they will adopt a different approach. We're not confident of that, but we hope that they will see the benefit of allowing transparency to be the order of the day.
Senator Griffin, that's a heavy accusation that Dr. Sands has placed on the Progressive Liberal Party in terms of ignoring the required function of reporting. What's your response? And is there any reason you feel that 84 questions on immigration alone have not been answered?
I mean, it's not surprising what's been said. It's part of the talking points of the Free National Movement over the last few months. The reality is, and it's just so coincidental that the Honourable Obi Wilshcombe would have directly addressed these questions when levied by the opposition in Parliament. We are operating a government of law and procedure, and for many of the instances, the questions weren't brought in the right way, weren't brought at the right time, and so there are particular rules in the House where these questions are answered. I think it's the second or third Wednesday when the House meets, and unfortunately, the House didn't meet on those times for particular reasons, and so I think we are following the rules, we are following the law, and it may not mesh into their agenda, but the reality is, if there was anything untoward that was happening, the Free National Movement would have us in court if we weren't following the law. So I think the fact that we're still here doing the people's business is a testament that we are following procedure.
I think Dr. Sands is eager to answer you, but we have to go to our Alta East Munnings right now, who again is standing by in Parliament Square, where the opening of Parliament will take place Wednesday morning. Alto?
Makashla, as you can imagine, organizing an event like the opening of Parliament is an arduous task, and it takes a lot of people to put this entire event together. One of them is the Royal Bahamas Police Force, and joining me now is the police force's the press liaison officer, Chief Superintendent Kristen Skippings. And first of all, Mr. Skippings, I want you to tell me how traffic will be organized tomorrow, because I know that traffic around this area is being monitored by police, and there are some rules that motorists want that police want the motorists to abide by, specifically tomorrow as the opening of Parliament begins around 10 o'clock in the morning?
Well, good evening, Al-Tawis, and good evening, Bahamas. Yes, I want to remind the motoring public that the road closures and road diversions will remain in effect until the completion of the opening of Parliament tomorrow. And so motorists, if you don't have to come into the nation's city, I'm going to ask you to use the alternate routes. You have Shirley Street that you can utilize if you're going west into the West Bay Street area. And if you want to go onto East Bay Street, then you have Woods Rogers Walk that you can utilize. But if you don't necessarily have to come downtown, I would ask you to, find an alternate route. We want to welcome you to come downtown because we're on the world stage right now as it relates to this 2023 session of the House of Assembly. And so persons who want to still come down here and witness it, it is a good opportunity to be a part of this historic occasion as we open the 2023 session of Parliament. And so those road closures, those road diversions remain in effect. There's going to be a lot of traffic congestion tomorrow. We have all of our parliamentarians, our senators, our judiciary staff, and all of those persons who are going to be making their way onto Bay Street. And so I want to encourage members of the public to exhibit tolerance as you traverse the streets of New Providence tomorrow. Those of you who work in the downtown area, I'm going to encourage you, if you're coming, leave home within sufficient time so that you don't have to get in any road rage or any accidents with anyone as you're coming to work. If you leave within sufficient time, I can assure you that we will minimize the occurrence of any accidents happening on our streets tomorrow.
Chief Superintendent, I saw the police commissioner here earlier ensuring that the logistics for the police was intact. Tell us about the presence the police force will have at tomorrow morning's opening of Parliament ceremony.
Well, security is our primary focus for the opening of Parliament tomorrow, and we have been working arduously since a few weeks back to ensure that we plan strategically for this event to ensure that this event goes unhindered by anyone. Let me make it emphatically clear, Altuis. We are on the world stage. This is the opening of Parliament, and we will allow this opening to go unhindered by anyone. We welcome persons to come downtown to witness the opening, but those persons who may have intentions of coming down into our nation's capital to create havoc, you will be arrested. There's no time for any disruptions as the House of Assembly is going to open tomorrow. We will ensure that it happens, and those persons who seek to create any form of havoc or any type of disruption tomorrow in Bay Street, I'm sending a clear and clarion message to you that you will be arrested. We have not given any permits for anyone to have any demonstrations tomorrow. And so those persons who have the intention of coming, I can assure you, like I said, we have strategically and methodically planned for this opening. It will go on unhindered and without any disruptions by anyone tomorrow.
Thank you, Chief Superintendent Kristen Skippins. Very good information. Thank you so much. Makushla, as you heard, the police will have a heavy presence here tomorrow for the official opening of Parliament. Back to you in studio.
Well, thanks, Alto. Parliament Square steeped in tradition, but gentlemen, do you think, based on the congestion it creates with an opening of Parliament, that maybe it should return to a hotel? If not, next time that serious consideration should be given to that. You have hundreds of people coming together in one space, traffic congestion, all those things that have to be worked out in fine detail. What's your take?
The seat of power, the power of the people, resides in the Houses of Parliament in Rawson Square. Until that changes, that is where it should take place. Any place else, I think, is an overreach. It's an extravagance that we can ill afford to bear. And so Bay Street it is.
Are you alluding to Bahama, Dr. Sands?
I wasn't alluding to it. I was being emphatic, specific, and deliberate. That we have seen this administration spend far too much money on parties and celebrations, and perhaps the sobriety ought to be the order of the day. Let's get on with the people's business, because the people want to see work done on their behalf. And they don't need to see extravagance, particularly since there are many, many people who just cannot afford the necessities of life.
Senator Griffin, parties and celebrations, as Dr. Sands called it, they just don't mesh well with increasing inflation.
Well, first I'll answer your first question. While I am a man of progress and modernity and transformation, I do agree that the opening of Parliament should happen in the precincts of Parliament. I would remind Dr. Sands that the reason it was had at Bahama last year is because we were still in the midst of a COVID pandemic, and there were concerns about social distancing, etc. In addition, we met the Parliament in a very devastating state, where the former Speaker under the administration said that Parliament was unworkable. And so at that time, Parliament had to undergo some renovations to even make it workable for us to do the work of the people in that space. And so Parliament was under renovation 2 years ago, in addition to the COVID pandemic, and so that's why it was held at Bahama. But I would also remind you that this administration intends to build a new Parliament building, one that is more conducive to the work of Parliament, a larger space with technology, accessible to those who may need better access and things of that nature. And so I think the Cabinet has already designated at the top of the hill of Parliament Street for that location.
Senator Griffin, talk of a new Parliament has long been out there.
Correct.
Is it, realistically thinking, will it happen in the Davis administration's term of office? We've heard about this for many years.
Yep. So I do think it will. I think.
And this, I'm sorry, and this despite it going to cabinet level. Mm-hmm. Will it go beyond that?
So I think it will. The Minister of Foreign Affairs is spearheading this, and that is one of the priorities, not just of the Minister, but also of the Prime Minister. The reality is, for any of us who've been in Parliament or visited Parliament, we see that the situation in Parliament is not workable. It's not built for the work that we do today. And so I think that this government has made it a priority. And just like you, I do hope that we are able to bring it to fruition, if not even just break ground within this term.
Well, it's important to stress that a prorogation differs from the dissolution of Parliament. The former, as indicated at the top of our broadcast, a reset, so to speak. The government's legislative agenda then back to square one, given that bills fall away, as do tabled questions. And as we noted, the F&M left quite a bit on the agenda. But let's take a look at some of the bills passed in the last session. More than 100.
Correct.
The PLP says the Parliamentary Service Bill, one of them.
It passed over 100 pieces of legislation in less than 2 years. So we've been rather aggressive in our legislative agenda. To say that we're not going to advance something that was in the prior speech from the throne would be incorrect. Certainly we stand by the legislative agenda that was reflected in the first speech from the throne, and those items will be addressed in the coming legislative session.
Let's now take a look at some of the bills passed in the last agenda. Well, we just noted, as we just heard from the Attorney General, the Parliamentary Service Bill that was passed in the last agenda. A bill near and dear to the former Governor General, the most honorable Cornelius Smith's heart, was the Volunteer Society Bill legislation that promoted a more organized and expanded volunteerism.
If you help recruit volunteers for school, you must understand what type of volunteers you need, because they're working in an environment with children. This bill helped to formalize that process and compartmentalize our skills. Madam Speaker, this bill can help us to better understand where volunteers come from and what type of skills they bring to the table.
Those the bills passed. In terms of what's to come in this new session, the government has foreshadowed a conditional release of offenders bill.
If you are sentenced to, for every 12 months you are sentenced to, you get 4 months off automatically when you reach the prison. So if you are sentenced to 12 months, they give you a release date that's 8 months from that date. If you misbehave, they can take back and add months on. But classically, you get 4 months off. And if when you come out of prison, you commit an offense, the very next day or the same day, you never serve those 4 months that they took off your sentence.
Gentlemen, that bill also referred to, or that proposed legislation also referred to as the parole bill. Now, we've made incremental steps in terms of shaking off the image of the prison as a punitive institution to turn more as a correctional institution. We've trained officers, we've changed the name, we've implemented programs for inmates, and we've sought to have the institution accredited. Do you feel this is enough, both of you, to stop the revolving door that we've had to bear for a very long time? And when I say a revolving door, I'm talking about the recidivism rate.
So first, I just wanted to address what the Attorney General said. As a member of the government, I was particularly proud to hear the Attorney General speak about our legislative accomplishments over the past term. Dr. Sands earlier would have suggested that the past 2 years have been disastrous, but I think just in that short clip, you would have seen that we are hard at work for the Bahamian people. When we first came into office, the country was locked down, shut down, closed for business. So we would have done a number of things economic-wise to open the country for business. We would have done COVID testing, and sort of leveled out the healthcare situation. And you would have seen from our legislative agenda that that's what we were focused on, volunteerism and things of that nature. And now, one of the things that the Attorney General would have highlighted is that a focus for us is going to be security, national security. Immigration is part of that, but also dealing with the prison and rehabilitation of offenders is also a part of that. We believe that as you would have suggested, that we need to move to more of a system of rehabilitation. And so right now, what the Minister Wayne Munro would have indicated is that this bill is part of the core of our legislative agenda for the new session. We want people to serve their time, but we also want to have avenues in which people can begin to correct their behavior. So for example, if you are sentenced to 12 years, right now, if you have good behavior, you could be released in 4 months or 8 months. What the new situation is going to happen is you can be released conditionally. And so you can be released on that 8 months, but there can be conditions attached to that. You have to get a job. You have to stay out of trouble. You cannot drink. Otherwise, you will go back and serve the remaining of your sentence. That's not in place now. And so we want to give people an opportunity to better themselves, but we also want to be sharp on the rule of law.
I think, Senator Griffin, I think even the minister has said it once before, what's in the heart of a man is in the heart of a man. And so there's no guarantee, as it is the case with any bill, that this will have the impact a government is hoping for in terms of recidivism. You agree?
And no, I partly agree, but right now that's why the bill is out for consultation.
Correct.
So we're consulting with all of the stakeholders to make the bill as effective as possible. The reality is, policy is more of an art than a science. You have to treat policy and legislation as sort of a living creature, and where there needs to be tinkering to the system and changing and consultation to make it work and be effective, that's what you need to do. And so this government right now is saying, we're not going to sit by and let the status quo be. So this is one of the transformative things that we are bringing here. So we've consulted across the region, Jamaica, Trinidad, the United States, the United Kingdom, to learn of best practices. And so the bill that we are going to bring is what we suggest would be the best at this time. But of course, if things don't work over time, we are obviously open to tinkering the bill and changing it so that it becomes more effective.
Dr. Sands, what's your take?
Well, you know, I first of all just want to point out that the Honorable Senator has perhaps a bit of a memory lapse, because the economy was absolutely not closed in September of 2021. And we had already started to see significant increases in the tourism product. Hotels were open, et cetera. But the approach to rehabilitation has to be holistic. And certainly our main holding facility is absolutely suboptimal. So there's, as we have all agreed, a need for significant infrastructure, training, and the general approach to those persons that are incarcerated. Overcrowding is a big, big problem at BDOCs. And so I think since governments are continuous, we all ought to be building on the successes, learning from the failures or shortcomings of each successive administration. And so let's applaud good ideas when they occur. Let's build on them so that we can continue to improve this great country of ours.
That said, then, do you agree that this is a good idea?
Oh, yes. You know, we will need to constantly revise the approach that we're taking. And when you look at the recidivism rate, it is far too high. And some people ask whether rehabilitation can take place in the current setting. The provision for medical care, the adjustment so that people on remand are separated in more spacious accommodations, et cetera. All of these are things that have to be addressed. To have a court that we can get rid of that, you know, that bus that comes downtown at 600 miles an hour, I think is going to be a major step in the right direction that most Bahamians clamor for. So let's improve what we have, and you know, let's call a spade a spade. If it's a good idea, it's a good idea.
Well, let's check again in with our Altavis Munnings down at Parliament Square. Well, at this point, we'll take a break. You're watching The Agenda, a look back at the 2021 legislative agenda. Stay with us.
First of all, we must recognize those brave women who fought at the beginning in order for this to be realized. Those women, back in those days, of course, you know, women were seen to be the supporters, more or less, not on the front line, but always in the back, supporting their male counterpart. For these women to step out against the odds, to fight for women to have the right to sit in Parliament was almost unheard of in our country. And so it was bravery, courage, that caused them to see the bigger picture, because they were doing it not for themselves, but for the future. And so today, my sitting in the Parliament is because of these women who have fought long and hard. I had no idea that I would one day benefit from this. I knew that I would be there as a woman, probably cheering on the others. But actually sitting in the seat of a Parliament, I said, God, we thank you for these heroes, because the heroines, that's what they were. And so, you know, Elaine, when I look at the history of the Parliament, I can't forget this part, because I was astonished at the history of the Parliament as pertaining to women.
Well, at this point, we check back in with our Altavis Munnings, who again is standing live at Parliament Square where the Wednesday's opening of Parliament will play out.
Yep, stand by.
Believe it or not, Makushla, the only persons who are still here in the Parliament Square are members of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Protocol Office, led by Director of Protocol Terry Archer, who's here ensuring that the seating plan is executed effectively for tomorrow morning's opening of Parliament ceremony. Now, I can tell you that it is styled, as I mentioned before, as a session of the Senate, and organizers want everyone who's coming here to have a good time and also learn more about the government's legislative agenda that's expected to begin when Parliament opens tomorrow. I can tell you that cabinet ministers, members of Parliament, former members of Parliament, former cabinet ministers, friends, supporters, everyone is expected to be here tomorrow to enjoy this new session of Parliament, which begins tomorrow morning right here on Parliament Square. Reporting from Parliament Square, I'm Altaviz Munnings. Back to you, Makushla.
Well, thanks, Altaviz. Some bills, of course, more contentious than others. Case in point, the Protection Against Violence Bill.
Not only seeks to uphold the nation's commitments under international conventions, such as the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women and the Inter-American Convention on the Prevention, Punishment, and Eradication of Violence Against Women, but also creates a domestic framework for supporting victims, handling complaints, and raising public awareness to violence in our society. This bill is not about imposing new bureaucratic structures, but about improving response mechanisms, better coordinating efforts, and providing much-needed support to those who need it most, the victims of violence.
Gentlemen, this particular bill created quite a firestorm. You had women's group against it. You had the F&M standing in support with the women's group. You had the Prime Minister speaking in the House of Assembly saying that he was both disappointed and disturbed by what was coming out, just before the bill was being debated. The government contends that the bill's name was changed simply because the term gender has a lot of sexual orientation. At last report, women's groups were focused on amending that very bill, and so soon after. And Social Services Minister Obi Wilshcombe, before his death, said that he was open to it. Dr. Sands, do you buy the government's argument in terms of, let's go on the surface first, of the name change of the bill?
No.
And the ramifications of it?
No, this was not just a watered-down version of the gender-based violence bill that people had worked so hard on for many, many years. This was bait and switch. I'll give you two examples. In the original gender-based violence bill, you had multiple NGOs who would have advised the minister, and they had quite a bit more autonomy. In this Protection Against Violence bill, the minister is the overseer. In the Protection Against Violence bill, it speaks to the domestic relationships. People can be injured outside of domestic relationships. And so it is not as comprehensive as the original bill. And I think it was capitulation to say that let's get something done. But I think there was a feeling of, okay, well, we'll take it, but we're disappointed.
That let's get something done brings me to a question for you, Senator Griffin. What do you say to those that this was simply a check mark on a campaign promise and to fulfill an international obligation even?
So first of all, I would say, as a young person, I very much valued the debate around this bill. For me, this is what democracy is. You have varying interests, special interests, people on various sides, and the reality is in government, you are perhaps not going to please everyone. the reality with this particular bill is that this bill spanned many administrations. I remember when Social Services Minister Melanie Griffin would have sort of first spearheaded it. This bill has gone through many iterations, and so the FNM likes to speak of the 2016 bill, but the reality is the bill was sort of being drafted and in place from 2012, going through many iterations. We are now in government, and we have to take the best advice from our advisors. The reason that the bill changed, and I would sort of push back a little bit on what you said, it's not a name change. The bill changed in substance. The gender-based violence bill dealt with gender-based violence. The protection against violence bill deals with violence as a whole. And so we would have taken advice from the Crisis Center as well as the Gender Affairs Division at the Ministry of Social Services, who indicated that they wanted a more comprehensive bill to deal with violence perhaps against children and violence for people outside of domestic situations. And so I would also push back a little bit against what Dr. Sands said. The bill does have a specific provision to deal with domestic relationships, but it also has another provision that deals with general relationships in the workplace and otherwise. And I remember that in particular because that's a point that they made in the Senate, and Ryan Pinder had to correct them on that. And so this government took the view that we're going to deal with violence as a more holistic approach. Part of the reason, as you suggested, because of the new definitions and emotions around the term gender, but also generally because we live in a country where there are lots of different types of violence, and this government wanted to be more comprehensive in dealing with that. This is the PLP's position. As I said, this bill has been on the table from around 2012 or before. If the FNM wanted to advance the gender-based violence bill, they were in government, they had a chance to do that. They didn't. But now we're in power, and we took advice from our consultants from the Crisis Center as well as the ministry, and this is the bill that we went with.
You know the Crisis Center, but that's a key argument that other women's groups make. That only the Crisis Center, only that women's group, the government used that as the basis to,
correct,
let's say, for lack of a better phrase, push ahead with the bill and ignored the sentiments of other groups. That's an argument that is being advanced.
So again, I would push back against that. So I think that there are certain specific provisions in the groups that the various, as you call them, women's groups would have advocated for that may have been changed or amended. But these groups also readily say that as a whole, the bill largely deals with a lot of the issues that they would want to be dealt with. But there are a few things that they perhaps didn't like. And so I don't want the perception to be out there that this is a horrible bill that they do not support. The reality is they perhaps didn't get everything that they wanted. And again, as you would have indicated, before his untimely death, the former Minister of Social Services said, as I have suggested, legislation is a living thing. And so if we didn't get it exactly right, we're open to more consultation, we're open to amending the bill, and I think the ministry has already begun that process of consultation to make the bill even better.
Dr. Sands,
just a brief addition. Not even get it exactly right, but not even to come close is the challenge here. And so perhaps with the do-over, with the reset, they would be minded to listen to the stakeholders that have expressed serious concerns about the weaknesses of this bill.
Speaking of weaknesses, Dr. Sands, what do you think, what is your party's position on what those amendments should perhaps look like? And I know we're leaning heavily on women's groups, but for your party.
If you look at the original gender-based violence bill, even if you just use a simple metric, length, number of pages, the Protection Against Violence Act is maybe 60%. So there are huge segments that have just been discarded, ignored.
You care to say what they are?
I mean, we don't have time in a 30-minute thing to go through
She's
the
giving
specifics.
You time right now.
So when you look at the specific protections for gender-based crimes perpetrated outside of domestic relationships, particularly in a country where gender-based violence is a serious and real issue today, it suggests that we missed the mark. And so when we listened to the various stakeholders, they expressed phenomenal concerns, so much so that they would have issued a statement on the day, I believe, or the day before this bill was actually debated. So much so that the Prime Minister had what I consider feigned indignation, okay? Oh, we're surprised that you would be upset. Well, if you have been led to believe that the work that you have done for all these years was finally going to come to fruition, and then at the 11th hour, you pull that bill, you discard it, and now comes something different. That's disappointing.
Senator Griffin, piggybacking off those comments, do you feel that in the face of such criticism on such a volatile issue, the bill really should have perhaps made it to this agenda, been put aside, and perhaps returned on the new agenda?
I don't. I think that the government was always very clear in our mandate that's in the Blueprint for Change. It was always very clear what we intended to do. And like I said, legislation is a living thing. Because the bill is passed does not mean it can't be amended. And so I think the government has already said that we are open to advice and consultation, and that's all that we can do. I think we're proud of the fact that the bill was passed, something that the FNM did not do in its time in office. They have a lot to say now in opposition, but it was not done. We've passed the bill. It's very comprehensive. It deals with all forms of violence in the country. And again, where there are areas for improvement, we are willing and open to accept that.
Dr. Sands made a comment off air. He said some reap and some sow. You know, how many bills of those passed during the first 2 years in office were left in place?
So I don't know the specific number of how many bills were left in place, but I think we also made a comment that government is continuous. And I think the idea is that outside of politicians being elected, ministries do their work. Ministries draft legislation. The AG's office is always drafting legislation. Ministries have particular mandates that need to be fulfilled regardless of who's in power. So the idea that legislation is left in place, I think that's sort of common knowledge and everyone knows that. I don't think it's particularly something to be proud of, that a lot of legislation was sort of just left there in drafting and not passed. So I think our government should perhaps get kudos for the fact that if things were passed, we would have dusted them off, consulted, amended, and actually passed the legislation.
Final thoughts?
On
final thoughts in terms of us going into a new legislative agenda, and your hopes in terms of what that should look like.
So I think this government has had a very successful 2 years. We've managed to open the economy. The Bahamas is back open for business. Tourism is booming. Financial services is booming. We would have raised the minimum wage. I think people generally feel better about the direction of the country than we were under the severe lockdowns under the last administration. I think we would have tackled our sort of first mission in our Blueprint for Change. And now the government has said, now that we have calmed the waters, there are other concerns, things that have recently come up and other things that we would have foreseen. And so I think now the government is indicating that now is the time to pivot our legislative agenda. And this is also part of our mission to be more transparent with the Bahamian people. We prorogue Parliament, and now we're coming back to the Bahamian people and saying, this is the plan moving forward. So I'm excited for opening a Parliament tomorrow. I'm particularly excited to see the new Governor General, Cynthia Mother Pratt, read the speech from the throne. I'm a huge fan of her. I'm happy that she is now Governor General, and I think the country, again, that's a symbol to have a woman in that position reading the speech from the throne. I think that's another symbol for the country to be proud of. So I'm excited about everything that's happening and to hear the speech from the throne.
Dr. Sands, what should it look like for you?
Well,
for your party, really.
I'd like to quote two prominent PLP parliamentarians who now have a tremendous amount of gravitas and influence. When they said, I speak of Philip Galanis and Leslie Miller, when they said that the average Bahamian is catching hell right now. Both of them said it independently. We are in the midst of a cost of living crisis, an energy crisis, an immigration crisis, and we have an administration that has squandered a phenomenal amount of goodwill in 2 years. Let's hope for the sake of Bahamians that they catch themselves and actually get something done. You know, we're going to have a big party tomorrow. A lot of money is going to be spent. But the ordinary Bahamian is going to be looking on and say, what's in this for me? And His Majesty's loyal opposition, led by Michael Pintard, is going to be making sure that we hold the government's feet to the fire so that every day when they show up, they actually come to do some work for the people of this country.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on the agenda. A look at the 2021 legislative agenda. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Sands, Senator Griffin.
Thank you for having us.
Well, thank you so much. Join us again tomorrow morning for the opening of Parliament. Our live broadcast begins at 9 a.m. I'm Makush Lapinder. Good evening, everyone.
You're watching the ZNS Network, the People's Station.
And a side of hot wings. Oh, and dipping sauce, marinara. Tell your driver to enter the south gate. There he'll give the guard the following code. Alpha 3 Bravo 917 Delta 8 Foxtrot November Delta.